There are not many systems that can claim to have kickstarted an entire industry, and even though we had computers like the ZX81 and the Commodore VIC-20 before it, it was the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, first released in 1982, that sold over 5 million units and was pivotal in starting the UK games industry. And regular viewers will know that I was definitely on the other side of the fence. I was firmly a Commodore kid in the 80s and 90s, and the Spectrum v C64 war was of course happening in playgrounds all over the UK. But I've always had a healthy dose of respect for the humble Specky and of course what it did for the industry. And I can highly recommend the fantastic documentary The Rubber-Keyed Wonder, which came out recently, if you want a real look at the history of the Spectrum and the influence that it really had. And in more recent years, I've actually explored the system and the community much more deeply, getting my hands on the incredible Spectrum Next computer at the end of last year, which I will get around to doing a video on this machine at some point. But if you're not familiar with it, it is a turbocharged FPGA-based machine with flashable cores and features that put it way beyond what the original system was capable of, and it is still backwards compatible, so you can play your old Specky games on here as well. But the great thing about the retro computing landscape in 2024 is the sheer amount of options that we now have, with real hardware, fantastic software emulation, and kind of falling in the middle of those two options are the recreations that we've seen from Retro Games Limited over the last decade or so, starting with the C64 Mini, the Maxi after that, the Amiga A500 Mini, the Atari 400 Mini, and their latest system is simply called the Spectrum. And this is a plug-and-play device which aims to capture the feeling of the original machine with a lot of modern conveniences built in. And there are some nice surprises that we don't usually see with a lot of the reproduction and mini systems that we'll delve into in just a minute. Now, before we take a proper look, this video is sponsored by my good friends at PCBWay. Now, if you need any affordable PCBs making, 3D printing, CNC milling, they've got you covered. Low-cost, fast turnaround quality boards, and check out their amazing shared project section of their website. They're big supporters of the retro community. So get a quote right now at PCBWay.com. And a massive thank you to the team at PlayOn who were kind enough to send me this amazing looking review unit package. Now, usual disclaimers, they haven't paid for this video. I'm not required to sing its praises or send it to them for approval. That said, this does look incredible. Now, sadly, the retail units are in a much more basic package, but I am really impressed with this. This presentation is so nice. But of course, opening this box is where the real goodness lies. And in here, we get our first glimpse of the Spectrum itself, looking very much like the original machine, but we'll check it out in closer detail in just a moment. Set that aside, and if we lift out this tab here, looks like there should be a bit more underneath, including, it looks like they've bundled the Spectrum t-shirt with these press packs, which I will wear with pride at the next retro gaming event that I attend. Looking very stylish there with the logo on the front, and it is large size Fruit of the Loom. Perfect, very comfortable. Thank you for that, guys. And we also get an included copy of Crash Magazine, the rebirth of Crash Magazine. Now, this was a famous British magazine back in the 80s, and it was reborn by Fusion Retro Publishing in recent years in this new A5 format. And I have seen this in WH Smith when I've been there a few times and had a little look through it, and it does look very similar in terms of the layout and the style, the graphics and everything to the original magazine from the copies of that I've seen. And in here, we get some reviews of the games that are included with the Spectrum, but here on the modern Spectrum scene as well. There are some classic game reviews in here too, which is very nice to see. I always liked it when computers came bundled with a free copy of a popular magazine. Thought that was a really nice introduction, so very nice to see Crash in the box. Speaking of publications, we have a rather massive manual, which I'll look at in more detail in a minute. Standard HDMI cable there, nothing special, and USB-C to USB-A for the power. No power brick included by the looks of it, which seems to be standard these days. And I pull that out, I imagine there is nothing under there. So very nice presentation pack here, but of course we want to see how well this runs, so we'll get it set up on the desk and check out the Spectrum in a bit more detail. Now, if you were hoping for some nice ASMR from me peeling off the label, unfortunately it's not stuck at all. It just kind of falls off, so sorry about that. But we can see here, looking at the Spectrum, I've got to say, what an incredible recreation of the original machine. Looks absolutely spot on. Even the feel of it as well. I mean, the kind of shininess of the metal at the top here, and it does feel like this is actually metal, not plastic. And the only difference really is at the top here it says Retro the Spectrum instead of Sinclair ZX Spectrum. The other side of it looking the same as the original machine. The back is where the new I/O ports lie. Again, pretty basic. We've got the home button there. We've got 4 USB ports, which feels a bit overkill for this, I've got to admit. HDMI, power switch as well, which is quite nice to see. And mine is serial number 100. Nice early model there. And a copyright to Retro Games Limited. So, yeah, just feel first impressions of this, very nice. If you want to see how it compares to the original machine, I do have a rather beat-up original 48K Spectrum for comparison that is currently missing its caps shift key. Does need a bit of TLC. But in terms of dimensions, size of it is identical. Even the weight, I mean, maybe this one feels a little bit heavier than the original machine, but there's not much in it. And the keyboards, yeah, they've done a really good job at capturing that dead flesh feel, I think it's called, of the rubber keys of the original Spectrum. So in terms of the look and feel of the two machines, have done a really good job at recreating the original Spectrum here. Really impressed with that. And if you are curious as to what's on the inside, well, it is pretty much as expected. Very similar, if not identical, to their previous machines like the A400. Got a little motherboard with an ARM CPU and a daughter board on here for extra USB and the keyboard connections. And as suspected, yeah, we do have a bunch of weights in here as well, just to make the system a bit heavier and make it feel more like the original Spectrum, and obviously so it doesn't slide around your desk too much when you're using it. And I've just spotted a lovely tribute hiding inside the top of the case as well. Very nice touch. And just before we boot up the machine and have a play, I definitely wanted to show you the manual in a bit more detail. Sadly, this doesn't come with the retail units from what I've seen, but you can download it as a PDF. And I can see why, because it is really in-depth, especially for what is essentially an emulation box. This weighs in at 290 pages, and it feels really reminiscent of the old manuals. They came with the 8-bit micros that I spent hours looking through as a kid. And now this details everything from the initial setup to configuration, instructions for the bundled games. Really good. They've done a superb job with this. So let's get the machine up and running. Now, connecting the HDMI and USB power, the first thing we see is the language selection screen. And you control this using the arrow keys on the keyboard. And I should have pointed that out earlier. I assume that you kind of realise that the keyboard on this does work. Unlike the previous Retro Games Limited mini systems, this is obviously a full-size machine and the keyboard is fully functional. And we've got all the basic commands and shortcuts on here as well, just like the original, because you can actually program in BASIC on this machine as well. And we'll check that out in a bit more detail soon. And after selecting the language and display mode, we land in the main screen, the Games Selection Carousel. Now, if you've used any of Retro Games Limited's other systems, this will be instantly familiar. It is the same that you get on the A500 Mini and the Atari 400, a nice easy way to see the titles that are preloaded on the system. And you get a nice big screenshot and a description of each game, and there are 48 titles built into this machine, including some of the Spectrum's best rated titles. Now, I think in terms of giving you an overview of a system's library, in terms of included games, this could be their best bundle yet. And unlike the other systems from Retro Games Limited, the Spectrum doesn't come with an included controller. And that kind of makes sense. The original ZX Spectrum, the 48K, didn't have joystick ports on there. You had to have an expansion with those on. So that means that keyboard was often the default input method, although obviously you could use Kempston joysticks, and later editions of the Spectrum did have included ports. So we'll try a controller on this soon, but out of the box, the main way to control this is using the keyboard. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, it gives us a few keyboard shortcuts. Now, if you press space for options, in here, you can enable the CRT filter. So if you want that fake scanline effect on your games, you can do that from here. You can also change the border size And there are even some decorative frames that you can set, as obviously all the games made for the Spectrum were made with a standard def CRT in mind. But if you're not a fan of black bars on modern displays, you can turn this on. Personally, I'm not a big fan of having frames. And also, if you love a game, you can actually give it a rating by pressing the F key, so you can rate it out of 1 to 4 stars. Pressing Q will bring up the keyboard shortcuts, so you can see the controls for the game. And then it is M to start the title. And I thought a good place to start would be with Phoenix. Now this is a classic shoot 'em up. Used to love this game in the arcade back in the day. And from what I've seen, the Spectrum port of this game is really good. But it can be a bit of a tough game. Now that is one thing that's really good about playing the old games on here, because if, like me, maybe your reflexes are not quite as fast as they once were, when you die in a game, you can actually just press the home button on the back of the system and hold down the O key on the keyboard. And from here, you can rewind your gameplay back up to 30 seconds and then continue the game from the moment just before you died. And so obviously it is, it is cheating, of course, but it is definitely a nice quality of life feature, especially as a lot of these games back then had no continues, no way to save back then. Often you had to do them with like 2 or 3 lives. So I think, if there are games that you didn't finish back in the day and you want to get a bit further in them, this is definitely a nice feature to have. And speaking of saving games, you can do that on here as well. Now, if you get to a point in a game and you want to save it and pick it up later on, obviously back in the day, what you'd need to do is pause the game and then leave your computer on all day while you went to school and pick up the game 6-7 hours later. But now you can just press the home button. It will suspend the game's current state, press A on the keyboard, and then you can assign it to one of 4 save slots for each game. And in terms of how well the games run, well, admittedly, I'm not a Spectrum gaming connoisseur by any stretch of the imagination, but having played some of these titles at events and on other emulators and on my Spectrum Next, I think they feel spot on for the most part. Everyone I've played feels perfect. And I mean, emulating a Spectrum isn't exactly taxing for a modern CPU, so I wouldn't expect this to struggle with any of the games at all. So the 48 included games are all well and good, but obviously the Spectrum had a huge library. Some estimates actually put it at over 17,000 titles. And luckily, this system isn't locked down at all. You don't have to hack it or anything like that. You can literally download games in a variety of formats and load them from a USB stick really easily. And this is where I can show you another very cool feature. Now, you probably noticed that all the games I've demoed so far have loaded instantly. But of course, that wasn't the experience most of us had back in the 80s. We were used to waiting 10 to 15 minutes for a game to load in from cassette tape. And on the Spectrum, that was a big part of the experience. Hearing the sounds of the game's data being played through your television speaker, the flashing borders while data was being passed, and some games had really cool loading screens as well. So if you are nostalgic for that, the Spectrum does actually support loading games in tape format, and you can actually set how long you want to wait. So you can either speed it up or wait the full amount from the tape. And here, in all of its glory, you can grab yourself a cup of tea and sit back and enjoy the experience of loading Spectrum games from cassette tape. And there's even virtual tape controls built in as well. So if you press home and hit A, you can rewind, pause, fast forward the tape from here. Crazy. And you may have spotted on the settings screen that you can change which system you want to emulate, because the Spectrum doesn't just emulate the original 48K Speccy, you can set it to work with titles released for later models as well. And this was a big surprise to see in here. This little toggle switch that says Enable Extended Colors. Now, there is still a very active indie gaming scene on the Spectrum, with new games being released all the time, and the ULAplus is a third-party enhanced video controller. Now, what it does is it expands the original 16 color palette of the Spectrum up to a massive 64 colors, meaning that games and demos that support this can offer much more vibrant and detailed visuals. So if you want a good example of that, you can actually download the brilliant ULAplus 10th Anniversary Demo Collection with a load of games and demos included in there, and it's very cool to see that this mode emulates the ULAplus. I really didn't expect to see that in there. And this leads us nicely onto one of my favourite things about the Spectrum. Now, when it was revealed that this machine will have a working keyboard, the question I saw everybody asking is, can we program it? Well, yes, you can. Now, it is a bit hidden away currently, and I'm hoping they will make this a bit more obvious in a future update. But if you press Options on any game and then go into Advanced, from here you can boot into Classic mode. And this works as the original machine did and drops you straight into Sinclair Basic. Now, programming the Spectrum is an unusual experience if you're used to other machines. I guess Sinclair knew that the keyboard wasn't that great, so instead of typing out the full commands, on the Speccy, you just press the letter associated with that basic keyword. So if we want to do the classic print our name repeated on the screen program, we just type in the line number 10, press space, and then instead of typing print, we just press P on the keyboard. And then to get quotations, we press symbol shift and P. We can then type in hello YouTube 20 space G will autocomplete go to 10 enter, and pressing R will fill in run. Press that, enter. And there we have the classic program that everybody knew back in the day, and you can save your programs to USB stick as well. So one last test that I wanted to do with the machine, I did read in the manual that you can use Retro Games Limited's controller with this, the one that came with the A500 Mini, and I've tested this out and it does work well, and you can see it in the settings screen as well. So if you'd rather not use keys, you can use this. Although playing with a control pad felt a bit weird for a Spectrum. If you didn't use a keyboard back in the day, chances are you'd have been using a joystick on your machine. So I tried the A400's CX joystick with it, and I'm pleased to report it worked flawlessly. And these are available to buy separately, so if you want a joystick that is known to work well with the system, this is worth a buy. Although, you're probably more likely to have used something like a Competition Pro joystick back in the 80s, and I do have the USB version of the Competition Pro, so I thought I'd give this a try, and I was initially quite happy to see that the directions all work fine, but unfortunately, try as I might, I couldn't get any of the fire buttons working in the games or on the menu, so that was quite disappointing to see. So basically, if you want to use a third-party controller, just know that your mileage may vary. So that's been a first look at the Spectrum, another product that Retro Games Limited have smashed out of the park as far as I'm concerned. Now, admittedly, I'd much rather use my Spectrum Next or my Amiga 1200 over the A500 Mini, but these systems have definitely got a place for nostalgic fans who want to return to the golden age of gaming, or if you just want a handy emulation system that you can throw under the living room TV, no hassle connecting it to modern displays, or put it in a bag to take around a friend's house for a retro gaming night. These systems work really well. Load up a USB stick of your favourite games and you've got an amazing way, hassle-free, to experience the classics, with the added bonus of being able to program and the highly configurable settings on here, which should please even the most die-hard fans. And the great thing about these machines is how the community embraced them. You've already got packages like the Pandora suite running on the A500 Mini that turns it into an amazing emulation box that can run games for the Mega Drive, SNES, Game Gear, PlayStation and lots more. And there are packs of games and demos that you can install, and I fully expect to see the community releasing some interesting and exciting things for the Spectrum in coming months. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Just a reminder that I do a weekly retro gaming and technology podcast called The Retro Hour, bringing it up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro from over the last week and interviewing industry veterans on the show each week. You can get it every Friday from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or head to the website theretrohour.com. And while you're here on YouTube, here are another couple of my videos I think you might enjoy. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.